My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 31 years old, and 6 hours after waking up from surgery, I realized my own sister had taken my company away from me. I was still lying in a hospital bed when it happened. The room smelled like antiseptic. The lights were too bright, and my body felt heavy from the anesthesia that hadn't fully worn off yet. I remember trying to sit up slowly, wincing as the pain in my abdomen reminded me exactly why I was there. The surgery had taken 6 hours. The doctors said it went well, that I should focus on recovery, that I needed to rest. But the first thing I did wasn't rest. It was reach for my phone, because when you build a company from nothing, you don't just turn it off, even for a day. My company wasn't just a business. It was something I spent 9 years building from the ground up. Every system, every client, every process, I knew it all. I had designed it. I had fixed it when it broke. I had stayed up nights when no one else even knew there was a problem. And before going into surgery, I made one decision I thought I could trust. I gave temporary control to my sister, Emma Carter. She wasn't the technical one. She didn't build the systems, but she knew how to talk to people. The board liked her. Investors listened to her. And more importantly, she was family. I thought that meant something. I unlocked my phone and opened my email, and that's when everything felt wrong. I wasn't logged in. At first I thought it was just a session timeout. It happens sometimes. So I typed my password again. Error. I tried again. Error. Then I hit forgot password. The screen froze for a second before a message appeared. Account not recognized. I stared at it, not fully processing what I was seeing. That didn't make sense. This was my primary account, the one tied to everything. I refreshed the app. Same result. My chest tightened slightly. Not panic. Not yet. Just something off. So I opened our internal system next. The dashboard I used every single day. The one that showed real-time operations, financial flow, client pipelines. The screen loaded. Then another message appeared. Access denied. That's when I sat up straighter. The pain from the surgery hit immediately, but I ignored it. Because now I understood something wasn't a glitch. Someone had changed permissions. I opened Slack. Logged out. I opened the banking app. Access restricted. Every system I tried, one by one, was gone. It wasn't random. It was coordinated, clean, complete, like someone had gone through every layer of the company and removed me from all of it. And in that moment, still sitting in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, I realized something that didn't feel real. I wasn't just locked out. I had been replaced. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If you woke up after surgery and realized someone had taken control of everything you built, would you panic? Or would you stay calm? Comment 1 if you'd panic. Comment 2 if you'd stay calm. Because what I did next wasn't panic. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed one name. Emma. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Olivia, she said, her voice completely steady. No surprise, no concern, like she already knew I would call. Why am I locked out? I asked. No emotion. Just the question. There was a brief pause. Then she said something that changed everything. You're not in charge anymore. The words didn't register at first. They were too simple, too calm, like she was talking about something minor. What I said, the board made a decision, she continued. While you were in surgery, the company needs stable leadership right now. Stable leadership. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how carefully she chose those words, like she had rehearsed them. So you locked me out, I asked. You were going to be out for weeks, she said. We couldn't risk uncertainty. Uncertainty. 9 years of building something, reduced to a risk factor. I didn't respond immediately, because in that moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not shock. Something colder. Something clearer. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a move. Planned, executed, finished. She hadn't just taken control. She had removed me completely. "Emma," I said quietly, "what exactly did you do?" There was another pause, short, controlled. Then she said, "I did what you couldn't do. I made a decision." And then she hung up. I slowly lowered the phone and stared at the blank screen. Around me, the hospital room was still the same. Machines beeping softly, curtains half drawn, sunlight cutting across the floor. Nothing had changed, except everything had, because somewhere outside that room, my company was still running, just without me, and my own sister was sitting in my place, thinking it was over. What she didn't realize was this: before I went into surgery, I had already seen something coming, and I had prepared for it, just not the way she expected. I didn't call anyone else after Emma hung up. Not the board, not my lawyer, not even the head of operations who had worked with me for years. Instead, I put my phone down on the hospital bed and just sat there, breathing slowly, letting the situation settle, because reacting too fast would have been a mistake. Emma had already made her move. That much was clear. What mattered now wasn't emotion. It was understanding exactly what she had done, and more importantly, what she thought I didn't know. Emma Carter had always been the kind of person people trusted immediately. She walked into rooms like she already belonged there. Confident, polished, controlled. While I was the one behind the scenes, building systems, solving problems, fixing things, no one else even noticed Emma was the one shaking hands with investors and sitting across from board members, making them feel comfortable. She knew how to say the right thing, at the right time, to the right people. And over time, that made her visible. More visible than me. The board liked her. That part was never a secret. They didn't understand the technical side of the company, and Emma made things simple for them. Clear, clean, predictable. I always assumed that balance worked in our favor. I built the foundation. She managed perception. Together, it made the company stronger. At least, that's what I believed. Until now. I picked up my phone again and opened my personal email, the one not connected to company systems. Still accessible, still untouched. That told me something important. Whatever Emma had done, she had limited it strictly to internal systems. Controlled, targeted. That wasn't panic. That was strategy. I searched for the last few emails before my surgery. Contracts, board updates, internal memos. Everything looked normal on the surface. No warning signs. No sudden red flags, which meant one thing. If there was a plan. It didn't start yesterday. It started earlier, and I had missed it. I leaned back slowly against the hospital bed, ignoring the dull pain still sitting under my ribs, and replayed the last few weeks in my head. Emma had been more involved than usual. Sitting in on meetings she normally skipped. Asking questions about access levels, requesting temporary permissions just in case something happened during surgery. At the time, it felt reasonable, responsible even. She framed everything as preparation, as support, as someone stepping up while I recovered. I approved those permissions myself. That was the part that mattered. I gave her access, which meant, on paper, nothing she did would look like a breach. At least not immediately. I exhaled slowly, because now I understood the shape of what she had done. This wasn't a sudden takeover. This was a slow repositioning. Step by step, quiet, invisible, and by the time I was lying unconscious in an operating room, she was already in position. The board meeting she mentioned, that wasn't an emergency decision. That was timing. Perfect timing. No resistance. No pushback, because the only person who could challenge it was under anesthesia. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting that settle. Then I checked something else. My calendar. The company calendar was locked, but my personal one still synced basic entries. There it was. A board review session scheduled during my surgery window, marked as routine alignment. routine. I almost smiled. That was Emma's style. Never dramatic, never obvious, always reasonable. I opened one more app. Our document storage. Limited access, but not zero. Some shared files were still visible. I scrolled carefully. Financial summaries, operational reports. Then I found something interesting. A presentation file, time-stamped 2 days before my surgery. Title: Leadership Continuity Plan. My pulse slowed. Not faster, slower. Because this was it. I couldn't open the full document. Access restricted. But I didn't need to. The title was enough. Continuity Plan. That's what she told them. That's how she framed it. Not a takeover. Not a replacement. A solution. For risk. For uncertainty. For leadership stability. She didn't remove me. She protected the company. I closed the app and rested the phone on my chest. And for the first time since waking up, I understood something clearly. Emma didn't just take my position. She replaced my narrative. To the board, I wasn't the founder who built the company. I was the risk. The unstable variable. The person temporarily incapable of leading. And she stepped in to fix it. That was the story they believed. And honestly, it was a good one. Clean, logical, easy to accept. Which meant arguing emotionally would do nothing. Calling them, explaining, defending myself. It wouldn't work. Because Emma didn't win by force. She won by framing. And the only way to undo that wasn't to fight the story. It was to expose what she built it on. I reached over slowly and grabbed my laptop from the side table. My body protested immediately, but I ignored it. Pain was irrelevant right now. I powered it on, connected to hospital Wi-Fi, and opened something most people in the company didn't even know existed. A backup archive. Not of data, of decisions. Every major permission change. Every executive level override. Every temporary access grant. Recorded. Quietly. Automatically. A system I built years ago. Not because I didn't trust people, but because I understood something simple. Control isn't about who has access. It's about who can prove what happened. The archive loaded slowly, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. And then I saw it. Emma's access expansion. Approved by me. Yes, but extended. Beyond what I authorized. Subtle. Technical. Easy to miss unless you knew exactly where to look. She didn't just step in. She stepped over a line she wasn't supposed to cross. And that was the mistake. I leaned back again, this time allowing myself a small breath. Because now everything felt different. Not solved, not finished, but clear. Emma thought she removed me cleanly. That there were no traces, no resistance, no consequences. But she didn't realize something. When she locked me out of the company, she also triggered something she didn't know existed. And I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. I didn't move immediately after finding the access logs. I just sat there staring at the screen while the hospital room stayed completely quiet around me. Because what I was looking at wasn't just proof, it was timing. And timing was everything. Emma didn't take control by accident. She didn't panic and make a reckless move. She calculated it. She waited until I was in surgery, until I couldn't respond, until there was no resistance. That meant one thing. She expected me to fight back, just not this way. I scrolled slowly through the logs again, reading each line carefully. Permission granted, permission extended, override executed. All clean, all technically valid. Until one point, one small extension that went beyond what I had approved. It wasn't obvious, not to someone who didn't build the system, but I did. I knew exactly how those permissions were supposed to behave, and Emma had pushed them just far enough to take full control, which meant, on paper, she was safe, but in reality, she had crossed a boundary she didn't understand. I closed the laptop halfway and leaned back against the bed again, because this was the moment most people get wrong. This was where emotion takes over. where anger turns into reaction, where people make noise instead of moves. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. What I felt was clarity. Emma thought she had already won, that the board was aligned, that I was out, that everything was finished, and that was exactly why she was exposed, because people only get careless after they think it's over. I picked up my phone again and opened my messages. There were already notifications, internal team chats, a few missed calls from department heads. One message stood out. Kevin, head of operations. Olivia, I don't know what's going on, but I just got an update saying Emma is acting CEO. Is this real? I didn't respond. Not yet, because answering him would create noise, questions, movement, and right now, I needed silence. I needed Emma to believe I was exactly where she thought I was. Weak, confused, out of control. I locked the phone again and looked back at the laptop screen. Then I opened something else. Not the archive. Not the logs. Something deeper. The governance layer. The part of the company structure that only activates under specific conditions. Something I built years ago and never told anyone about. Not even Emma. A contingency protocol. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't shut things down. It didn't alert the entire company. It just watched, quietly, and waited. I navigated through the system, slowly, ignoring the pain in my side as I adjusted my position on the bed. Then I saw it. Status triggered. I didn't react. I just read it again. Triggered. That meant the system had already detected the leadership change. It had already flagged the transition. And more importantly, it had already started the review process. Emma didn't just remove me. She activated a chain of verification she didn't know existed. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of relief, but because now everything had a direction. This wasn't about taking the company back emotionally. It was about letting the system do exactly what it was designed to do. Verify authority, validate transitions, and escalate if something didn't align. And something definitely didn't align. I opened my personal email again and started drafting something. Not long, not detailed, just one line. Clean, controlled, confirm received. I didn't send it yet. I stared at the sentence for a moment, because this wasn't communication. This was a signal to the right people. At the right time, I checked the recipient list. Legal oversight, independent board member, external compliance. Not Emma, not internal staff, not anyone she could control. I hovered over the send button, then stopped, because timing still mattered. If I sent it too early, Emma would react. She would tighten control, cover gaps, adjust the narrative. But if I waited just a little longer, she would move forward, confident, visible, exposed. I closed the laptop slowly and placed it beside me. Then I reached for the hospital call button and pressed it lightly. A nurse entered a minute later. "Do you need anything?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Yes," I said calmly. "I need to be discharged as soon as possible." She looked slightly surprised. "You just came out of surgery," she said. "You should rest at least another day." I held her gaze for a second. Not aggressive, not urgent, just certain. "I understand," I replied, "but I need to leave today." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll talk to the doctor." When she left the room, I picked up my phone again and looked at the time. Emma was probably already in my office, sitting in my chair, talking to the board, explaining decisions, acting like everything was under control. And for now, she was right, because I hadn't made a move yet. But that was about to change. I opened the email again, looked at the sentence one more time, confirm received, and this time I pressed send. No explanation, no warning, no emotion, just a message, because Emma thought she had already taken everything. What she didn't realize was this: she hadn't ended anything. She had just started something she couldn't stop. I didn't rush out of the hospital the moment the email was sent. That would have been too obvious, too emotional, too reactive. Instead, I leaned back against the bed and closed my eyes for a moment, letting everything settle into place. Because once you make a move like that, you don't follow it with noise. You let it work. The doctor came in about 20 minutes later. He looked at my chart, checked the monitor, and then looked back at me with a slight frown. "You're recovering well," he said, "but I wouldn't recommend leaving today." I nodded like I understood. "What if I sign a release?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. "You could," he said, "but you'd be taking responsibility for any complications." "That's fine," I replied. He studied me for a moment longer, probably trying to understand why someone who had just gone through a 6-hour surgery would choose to leave early. But he didn't ask. "I'll have the paperwork prepared," he said finally. When he left, I reached for my phone again. No new messages from Emma, no missed calls, nothing, which told me exactly what I expected. She hadn't seen the email yet, or if she had, she didn't understand what it meant. That was good. Silence meant she was still operating inside her version of the story, still confident, still in control, and the more she acted from that position, the deeper she stepped into it. I opened my inbox again and checked the sent email. Delivered, read by one recipient, not Emma, one of the independent board members. That was enough. I didn't need immediate action. I just needed acknowledgement. Confirmation that the signal had reached someone outside her influence. I put the phone down and slowly shifted my position carefully, moving my legs over the side of the bed. The pain was still there. Sharp, controlled, manageable. I stood up slowly, steadying myself against the edge of the bed as the room tilted slightly for a second before settling. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about presence. Emma had taken my position in the company. Now I needed to re-enter the system, not as someone asking questions, but as someone who already knew the answers. By the time the discharge papers were ready, the sun had moved lower in the sky. The light coming through the hospital windows had softened, stretching long shadows across the floor. I signed everything without hesitation. The nurse handed me a small envelope with instructions, medications, and follow-up details. "You should go home and rest," she said gently. I nodded. "I will." But that wasn't where I was going. Outside the hospital, the air felt colder than I expected. Not like the night of the storm years ago, but enough to remind me of it. Enough to bring back a memory I didn't need right now. I ignored it. I called a car. The ride to the office took 22 minutes. I didn't check my phone during the drive. I didn't respond to any messages. I just looked out the window and watched the city move the way it always did, normal, steady, unaware that anything had changed. But inside one building, everything had. When the car stopped in front of the office, I didn't move right away. I looked up at the building for a few seconds. Glass exterior, clean lines, the company name displayed across the front, something I had stared at hundreds of times before. But today, it felt different, not unfamiliar. Just shifted. I stepped out of the car slowly and walked toward the entrance. The security guard at the front desk looked up as I approached. For a brief second, I saw hesitation in his eyes. Not recognition, not confusion, something in between. "Olivia," he said. "I didn't expect, I know." I interrupted gently. Not cold, not sharp, just enough to stop the sentence. He nodded slowly. "You're not on the active access list right now." Of course I wasn't. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a physical badge. Not the one tied to daily access. A different one. Executive override. Rarely used. Never discussed. He looked at it, then at me, then back at the badge, and without another word, he stepped aside. "You're good," he said quietly. I walked past him without stopping. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. Not because of distance, because of awareness. Every floor that passed, every number lighting up, it all felt like a countdown. Not to confrontation, but to alignment. By the time the doors opened on the executive floor, the energy was different. People were moving faster. Conversations were quieter, controlled. I stepped out and walked down the hallway. No one stopped me, but they noticed. They always notice. And then I saw it. My office door, closed, lights on inside, and through the glass, Emma, sitting in my chair, talking, calm, focused, exactly where she believed she belonged. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there for a second, watching, not emotionally, just observing, because this wasn't the moment to react. This was the moment to understand how far she had gone, and how confident she still was. I turned away from the door and walked toward the conference room at the end of the hall instead, because Emma wasn't the first person I needed to see. And when I pushed that door open, 3 people were already inside, waiting, not surprised, not confused, just ready. And that's when I knew. The email had done exactly what it was supposed to do. The 3 people in the conference room didn't stand when I walked in. They didn't look surprised either. That was the first thing I noticed. Not confusion, not tension, just awareness. Like they had been expecting this moment, just not exactly when it would happen. I closed the door quietly behind me and took a few steps forward. The pain from the surgery was still there, sitting just beneath the surface, but I ignored it. It didn't matter right now. Nothing did except what happened next. Margaret Lee was the first to speak. Independent board member, mid-60s. Calm, precise, and almost impossible to influence. Which was exactly why I had included her in that email. "Olivia," she said, her voice steady, "you look like you should still be in a hospital." I allowed a small breath. "I probably should be," I replied. But this couldn't wait. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slightly. "No," she said. "It couldn't." The 2 men sitting beside her were from external compliance and legal oversight, not part of Emma's daily communication loop, not people she could easily control with narrative or presence. That was intentional. Everything about this was intentional. Margaret gestured toward the seat across from her. "Sit," she said. I did, slowly, carefully. Not as a founder returning to claim authority, not as someone trying to prove something, just present. Because that was enough. She folded her hands on the table and looked directly at me. "We received your message," she said. "Confirm received." I nodded once. No explanation, no added context. She didn't need it. "You triggered a governance review," she continued, "based on a leadership transition event." One of the men opened a folder in front of him and slid a document slightly forward. "We've already begun verification," he added. I leaned back slightly in the chair, not relaxed, just aligned, and I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned the document so I could see it clearly. Time-stamped logs, permission changes, access extensions, the same ones I had already reviewed earlier. But now, they weren't just data, they were evidence. "The transition wasn't clean," he said finally. Margaret spoke next. "Your sister was granted temporary authority," she said, "but it appears she extended that authority beyond the approved scope." I didn't react. I didn't need to, because this wasn't new information. This was confirmation, and confirmation is power. "To be clear," Margaret continued, "we're not concluding intent yet, but the structure of the takeover raises concerns." Concerns. Another careful word, like stability, like continuity, the same language Emma used. But now, it was turning. I looked at Margaret for a moment, before asking the only question that mattered right now. "Has the full board been notified?" She shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she said. "Only those required for preliminary review." Good. That meant Emma still didn't know the scope of what had started. She thought she was in control, still moving forward, still presenting herself as CEO. And the longer that continued, the stronger the contrast would be when the system responded. "What's the next step?" I asked. One of the men answered. We call an internal audit session, he said. Emergency level. Limited disclosure, Margaret added, and we request a formal explanation from Emma. There it was, the moment where the structure began to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely. When I asked, Margaret checked her watch briefly. Within the hour, she said. I nodded once. That was faster than I expected. Which meant the system had flagged more than just the access logs. It had escalated. Quietly. Completely. She looked at me again, this time slightly differently. Not as someone who had been removed, but as someone who still belonged in the conversation. Olivia, she said, I'm going to ask you something directly. I held her gaze. Did you anticipate this? I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't simple. I didn't predict Emma would do exactly this, but I knew something was shifting before the surgery. Enough to prepare, enough to build something in the background, something she couldn't see. I prepared for risk, I said calmly. Margaret studied me for a second longer. Then she gave a small nod. Good, she said. No judgment, no praise, just acknowledgement. The man beside her closed the folder and stood up slightly. We'll notify Emma, he said, and request her presence. I leaned forward just a fraction. Not enough to seem aggressive, just enough to be clear. Don't, I said quietly. They both looked at me. Let her walk in thinking she's still in control, I continued. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened slightly. She understood immediately. You want her unprepared, she said. Not a question, a statement. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She leaned back in her chair slowly, considering it. Then nodded once. All right, she said. We proceed as scheduled. The room went quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not still. Not uncertain. Aligned. Because now there were two realities moving at the same time. Emma's version, where she had already won, and this one, where the system had already started correcting her, and she didn't know yet. I stood up slowly, steadying myself, as the pain in my side returned slightly. Margaret noticed. You should sit down, she said. I shook my head. No, I replied. I need to be there. She didn't argue, because she understood something most people didn't. This wasn't about reclaiming a position. It was about witnessing the moment everything shifted back. And as I reached for the door, I could hear movement in the hallway. Footsteps, voices, controlled, professional, and one of them was Emma's. She was coming, confident, composed, completely unaware, and within the next few minutes, that confidence was going to be tested in a way she didn't see coming. I didn't return to my office. Not yet. Instead, I stayed just outside the conference room, standing near the glass wall where I could see the hallway without being immediately noticed. The pain in my side was sharper now, a steady reminder that my body wasn't fully ready for this. But none of that mattered. Timing did. Inside the room, Margaret and the two compliance officers were already seated. Again, documents, laid out folders, aligned, everything prepared with quiet precision. No raised voices, no urgency. Just structure. That's how real power moves. Quietly. In the hallway, I saw Emma before she saw me. She was walking toward the conference room with two members of the executive team behind her, speaking in that same calm, controlled tone she always used in meetings. We'll finalize the transition this afternoon, she was saying. I want everything aligned before the investor call. Transition. She was still using that word. Still framing it like this was a process already completed, not something about to be questioned. She stopped just short of the door and adjusted her jacket slightly, smoothing it down like she always did before stepping into a room where she expected control. Then she opened the door and walked in. I didn't follow immediately. I stayed where I was, just out of view, listening. Margaret, Emma said, her voice confident, even warm. I wasn't expecting a meeting right now. Margaret didn't respond right away. That silence alone shifted something. Subtle, but noticeable. We need to clarify a few things, Margaret said finally. Emma paused. Not long. Just enough. Of course, she replied. If this is about the transition, I can walk you through everything. I stepped closer to the door now, just enough to see inside. Emma had taken the seat at the head of the table. My seat, still unaware that the position she was sitting in had already started to move beneath her. One of the compliance officers spoke next. We're not here for a walkthrough, he said. We're here for verification. Emma's expression didn't change. But I saw it, a slight tightening in her jaw. Almost invisible. Almost. Verification of what she asked. Calm. Still controlled. Margaret folded her hands on the table. Your authority, she said. The word landed cleanly. No emotion. No accusation. Just fact. Emma leaned back slightly in the chair, crossing one leg over the other. The board approved my interim leadership, she said. That's already been documented. We've reviewed that, the compliance officer replied. We're now reviewing how that authority was executed. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Emma glanced at the documents on the table, then back at Margaret. I followed protocol, she said. Olivia was unavailable. The company needed continuity. There it was again. Continuity, stability, the same narrative, still intact, still confident. Margaret nodded once. And your access level was extended to facilitate that, she said. Emma didn't hesitate. Yes. Beyond the approved scope, Margaret asked. That was the first real shift. Small, but sharp. Emma didn't answer immediately this time. She looked at the compliance officer, then back at Margaret. I used the permissions granted to me, she said carefully. Not a direct answer, not a denial either. Controlled. Still controlled. But the room had changed. The air had changed. And Emma felt it. I stepped into the doorway. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. She saw me instantly. Her eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time since this started, her expression broke. Not completely, just a crack. A single second where the certainty slipped. Olivia, she said. My name sounded different coming from her now. Less controlled. Less certain. I didn't respond. I just walked into the room slowly and took a seat. Not at the head of the table. Not yet. Just present. That was enough. The compliance officer looked between us briefly, then back at Emma. We've identified an access extension, he said, tapping the document in front of him. One that exceeds temporary authorization. Emma's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to him. That's not accurate, she said. But her voice wasn't as steady as before, just slightly off. Enough. It is, he replied. Time-stamped. Logged. Verified. Silence followed. He slid the document across the table toward her. We need you to explain this. Emma picked up the paper slowly. Her eyes moved across the lines. I watched her read it. Watched the moment she understood what it was. Not just data, not just logs, but a record she didn't know existed. A line she thought was invisible, and now wasn't. She looked up again. This time not at Margaret, not at the compliance officer, at me, and in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just a review. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a reversal, and she wasn't in control of it anymore. She opened her mouth to speak, but for the first time, she didn't have the right words ready. And that was where everything started to change. Emma didn't speak immediately. She kept her eyes on me for a second longer than she should have, like she was trying to recalibrate in real time. That was the difference now. Before she controlled the room, now. She was trying to understand it. She lowered her gaze back to the document in her hands, reading it again more carefully. Slower. Looking for something she could use. Something she could explain away. But there wasn't anything there for her. Just clean data. Clean timestamps. Clean proof. This doesn't show what you think it shows, she said finally. Her voice had returned to that controlled tone, but it was thinner now. Less certain. Margaret didn't respond right away. She simply watched Emma, letting the silence stretch just enough to remove the illusion of control. Then she said, "Then explain it." Emma placed the paper back on the table, aligning it carefully, like she always did when she needed time. The system required extended access to maintain operational continuity, she said. I didn't exceed authority. I adapted to circumstances. Adapted. Another word. Another layer of framing. She was still trying to control the narrative. Still trying to stay inside the version of the story that made her actions sound necessary. The compliance officer shook his head slightly. "That's not how the permissions are structured," he said. "This extension wasn't adaptive. It was manual." Emma didn't look at him. She kept her eyes forward. "Then the system needs to be reviewed," she replied. Smooth, redirecting, shifting responsibility away from herself. I almost respected it. Almost. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "We're not reviewing the system," she said calmly. "We're reviewing you." That landed. Harder than anything else so far. Emma finally looked at her. Not defensive, not aggressive. Just aware now. Fully aware that the ground had shifted. "You're making this sound like a violation," she said. "I stepped in when the company needed leadership. I spoke for the first time." "You stepped in," I said calmly. "Then you locked me out." The room went quiet again. Emma's eyes moved to me slowly. "You weren't available," she said. "I was in surgery," I replied. No emotion, just fact. She didn't respond immediately, because there wasn't a way to reframe that. Not cleanly, not convincingly. "The board approved the transition," she said instead. "The board approved temporary authority," I said. "Not removal." That was the line, the one she crossed. And now, everyone in the room could see it. The compliance officer opened another folder and placed a second document on the table. "There's also the matter of account termination," he said. "Primary access credentials were revoked." Emma looked at the paper, then back up. "That was necessary," she said, "to prevent conflicting commands during transition." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Or to prevent resistance?" she asked. Emma didn't answer. Not directly. She shifted in her seat, slightly adjusting her posture. That small movement said more than anything she could have said out loud. Because now she was reacting, not leading. "Let's be clear," Margaret continued. "You assumed full operational control. You removed the founder from all systems. And you extended your authority beyond what was granted." Emma's jaw tightened. "I protected the company," she said. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "From me?" I asked. She looked at me again. This time she didn't answer at all, because that question didn't have a version she could control. The silence that followed was different from before. Not neutral, not uncertain, decisive. Because now, the narrative had flipped. Not completely, not publicly, but inside this room, it was already over. Emma knew it. Margaret knew it. I knew it. The only thing left was how it would be finalized. Margaret looked toward the compliance officer. "What's your recommendation?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Formal escalation," he said. "Full board review. Immediate suspension of unilateral authority." Emma's eyes moved quickly between them. "You're overreacting," she said. But the words didn't land the same way anymore. They didn't carry weight. They just filled space. Margaret turned back to Emma. "This isn't a reaction," she said. "It's a process." Then she paused. "Just long enough. And you triggered it." That was it. The moment. The shift. Emma leaned back slowly in the chair. Her hands resting on the table now instead of controlling it. Her posture changed. Not collapsed, but no longer dominant. For the first time since this started. She wasn't leading anything. She was inside something she couldn't control. I stood up slowly. The movement was small, but it redirected the room instantly. Everyone looked at me, not because I demanded it, but because now it was mine again. "What happens next?" I asked. Margaret answered. "We convene the board," she said. "Within the hour." I nodded once. That was faster than most people would expect. But not faster than I planned for. Emma didn't move. She just sat there, still holding on to the last version of control she had left. "Olivia," she said quietly. I stopped, but didn't turn immediately. Then I looked at her. "You could have just waited," she said. I held her gaze for a second, then replied just as quietly, "So could you." And I walked out of the room, because the next part wasn't about her anymore. It was about the board, and what they were about to see. By the time I stepped out of the conference room, the energy on the executive floor had shifted. It wasn't obvious to everyone. Conversations were still happening. People were still moving between offices, carrying laptops, checking phones, speaking in low voices. But underneath that, something had changed. Information had started moving, quietly, quickly. And once that happens inside a company, it doesn't stop. I walked toward the main boardroom at the end of the hall. The doors were already open. Inside, several members of the board had arrived early, seated around the long table reviewing documents that had been distributed minutes before. No announcements. No emails to the entire company. Just targeted communication. That's how real escalation works. You don't make noise. You move control. Margaret was already there, standing near the head of the table, speaking with one of the directors. She looked up as I entered, gave a small nod, and returned to the conversation. No introductions. No explanations. I didn't need them. I took a seat halfway down the table. Not at the head. Not yet. Because this wasn't about position anymore. It was about alignment. One by one, the rest of the board filtered in. Some of them glanced at me briefly. Some didn't react at all. But they all knew something was happening. They always do. That's why they're in those seats. 5 minutes later, Emma walked in. This time, she didn't pause at the door. She didn't adjust her posture. She didn't prepare herself the way she had earlier. She just entered and took a seat. Not at the head of the table. That detail didn't go unnoticed. Margaret closed the door behind her and moved to the front of the room. "We're starting," she said. "No build-up. No delay. Just forward." She placed a folder on the table and opened it. "This session has been called under emergency governance review," she continued, "triggered by a leadership transition event and subsequent authorization discrepancies." The words were precise, structured, impossible to misinterpret. Emma didn't move, but I could see it in her shoulders now. She understood exactly what this was. Margaret turned slightly, addressing the room. "Before we proceed," she said, "we'll review the sequence of events." One of the compliance officers began speaking, walking through the timeline step by step. Olivia enters surgery. Temporary authority granted to Emma. Board notification issued. Access expanded. Founder credentials revoked. Each point delivered calmly, clearly. No emotion, just fact. Then came the data. The logs. The extension. The line Emma crossed. Documents were passed across the table. Screens lit up with timestamps. Cross-referenced actions. Verification markers. This wasn't debate. It was presentation. Emma didn't interrupt. Not once. She just listened. And the longer she listened, the less space she had to speak. Because every detail closed another gap, removed another angle, eliminated another version of the story she had built. When the presentation ended, Margaret looked up. "Emma," she said, "you now have the opportunity to respond." The room shifted slightly. Not physically, but in attention. Everything moved toward her. Emma placed her hands flat on the table. For a second, she didn't speak. Then she did what she always did. She tried to regain control. "The company was at risk," she said. "Olivia was unavailable. The board needed leadership. I acted within the structure provided. Clean, direct, familiar. But this time, it didn't land the same way. Because now, everyone in the room had already seen the structure, and they knew exactly where it broke." One of the directors leaned forward slightly. "You revoked her access," he said. Emma looked at him. "To prevent operational conflict," she replied. "You removed the founder from all systems," he continued. "Temporarily," she said. Another director spoke. You extended your authority beyond approval. Emma didn't answer immediately, and that was enough, because hesitation in a room like this is an answer. Margaret stepped in. This isn't about intent, she said. It's about execution. Then she paused. And execution is measurable. Silence followed. Not empty, not passive, final. Because at that point, there was nothing left to argue. The system had already done its job. It had identified the break, verified it, presented it. All that remained was decision. Margaret looked around the table. We're moving to resolution, she said. No vote yet, just direction. But everyone understood what that meant. Emma leaned back slightly in her chair. For the first time since this started, she didn't try to speak again. Because she knew. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of. This wasn't a narrative problem. It was structural. And structure doesn't respond to words. It responds to proof. I sat there quietly, watching the room settle into that understanding. No satisfaction. No reaction. Just clarity. Because this was never about revenge. It was about alignment. About letting the system correct what didn't belong. And now, it was doing exactly that. Margaret closed the folder in front of her. We'll proceed with final action, she said. And in that moment, everything Emma had built over the past few hours started to collapse. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. No one spoke for a few seconds after Margaret said, We'll proceed with final action. The silence in the room wasn't hesitation. It was confirmation. In rooms like this, decisions are usually made before they're spoken out loud. What happens next is just formalizing what everyone already knows. Margaret looked down at the documents one last time, then lifted her gaze across the table. Based on the findings presented, she said, we are initiating a vote on immediate authority status. No build-up, no explanation, just movement. One of the directors leaned forward slightly. Clarify scope, he said. Margaret nodded. Temporary suspension of Emma Carter's unilateral control pending full review, she replied. Reinstatement of Olivia Carter's access and executive authority under oversight. There it was. Clean. Structured. Final. Emma didn't react immediately. She just sat there, her hands still resting on the table, her posture steady but no longer dominant. She wasn't trying to control the room anymore. She was inside it now. We'll proceed, Margaret said. One by one, hands moved. Not dramatically, not all at once, just methodically, director after director. Quiet agreement, no speeches, no arguments, no resistance, because there was nothing left to resist. The vote wasn't close. It didn't need to be. Margaret looked down briefly, counted, then nodded once. Motion carries, she said. No change in tone, but the room shifted instantly, because in that moment, control had already moved. Not symbolically, structurally. Emma exhaled slowly. Not sharp, not emotional, just contained. Then she looked at me, not with anger, not even with frustration, just understanding. You planned this, she said quietly. I met her gaze. I prepared, I replied. That was the difference. Planning assumes certainty. Preparation assumes risk. And Emma didn't think she was a risk. That was her mistake. Margaret continued, already moving forward. All system access will be reverted immediately, she said. Credentials restored. Executive permissions reassigned. One of the compliance officers was already typing, executing the changes in real time. Somewhere in the company, dashboards were updating, access layers shifting, control returning, quietly, completely, the same way it was taken. Emma looked down at the table for a moment, then back up again. You could have stopped me earlier, she said. The question wasn't defensive. It was genuine. I considered it for a second, then answered honestly. No, I said. I needed you to finish. She didn't respond, because she understood exactly what that meant. If I had stepped in too early, she would have adjusted, covered it, stayed within limits. But by letting her believe she had already won, she went further than she should have, far enough to make it undeniable. That wasn't revenge. That was exposure. Margaret closed the final folder and stood. "This concludes the session," she said. Just like that. No applause, no aftermath discussion, just closure. Because in rooms like this, once the decision is made, everything else is operational. People stood. Chairs moved. Papers gathered. Quiet conversations started immediately. Next steps, legal follow-ups, internal communication. The machine moving forward again. Emma didn't move right away. She stayed seated for a second longer than everyone else, then slowly stood up. When she walked past me, she paused. Just slightly. "You always thought 3 steps ahead," she said. I didn't respond, because this wasn't about being ahead. It was about not being blind. She gave a small nod. Not approval, not apology, just acknowledgement. Then she walked out of the room, and that was it. No scene, no collapse, just exit. I sat there for another moment, watching the room empty out. The system had corrected itself. The position had been restored, the structure realigned, everything back where it belonged. But something had changed. Not the company, not the board, me. Because this wasn't about taking something back. It was about seeing clearly what had always been there, and choosing not to ignore it anymore. I stood up slowly, the weight in my body still there but lighter now. Not physically, mentally, because the uncertainty was gone. And as I walked out of that room, the company wasn't just mine again. It was understood. I didn't go back to my office right away after the boardroom emptied. Instead, I stood in the hallway for a moment, watching people move again like nothing had happened. Assistants carrying folders, executives checking their phones, conversations restarting in low, controlled tones. From the outside, everything looked normal. But inside the system, everything had shifted back. Quietly, completely. My phone vibrated in my hand. A notification, then another, then more. System access restored. Executive credentials reactivated. Primary account verified. One by one, everything Emma had removed was returning. Not slowly, not partially, fully. I unlocked my phone and opened the dashboard. My dashboard. The one I built. The one I hadn't seen since waking up in that hospital bed. It loaded instantly. No errors, no restrictions. Just there. Exactly the way it was supposed to be. I stared at it for a second longer than I expected. Not because I doubted it, but because I understood what it meant now. Control isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just exists. I took a breath and started walking again, this time toward my office. The same door, the same glass panel, still closed, still lit from inside. But now, it was different. I opened it without hesitation. The room was exactly the way I left it. Desk clean, screens active, chair positioned slightly off-center from where Emma had been sitting earlier. There were no signs of struggle, no disruption, just a space that had been used and returned. I walked in slowly and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I didn't sit. I just stood there, looking around. Because this wasn't about reclaiming a room. It was about understanding what had happened inside it. Emma didn't try to destroy anything. She didn't damage systems. She didn't break structure. She replaced position, and that's what made it dangerous. Because most people only defend against force, not replacement. I moved to the desk and placed my phone down. Then I sat. Not heavily, not dramatically, just back where I belonged. The chair felt the same, but I didn't. I opened the main system again and started reviewing active processes. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had broken. The company had continued operating the entire time. which meant something important. The company didn't depend on Emma, and it didn't depend on me either. It depended on structure, and structure is what I built. A soft knock came from the door. "Come in," I said. Kevin stepped in slowly. He stopped just inside the doorway, looking at me like he wasn't completely sure what he was seeing. "So, it's real?" he asked. I nodded once. "It's real." He let out a small breath, almost like he'd been holding it all day. "No one knew what was going on," he said. "We just got updates. Changes. Then more changes." I understood that. That's how it works from the inside. You don't see the shift. You just feel it. "It's handled," I said calmly. He nodded, then paused. "Emma, I didn't answer right away, because that part wasn't finished. Not completely." "She's under review," I said finally. Kevin didn't ask anything else. He just nodded again and stepped back out of the room. The door closed quietly behind him. I leaned back slightly in the chair and closed my eyes for a second. Not to rest, just to reset, because the situation was over. But the meaning of it wasn't. Emma didn't fail because she wasn't capable. She failed because she thought control was something you could take once and keep. But real control isn't about taking. It's about sustaining, verifying, being able to prove every step you take holds under pressure. And hers didn't. My phone vibrated again. A message this time. "Emma." I looked at it for a few seconds before opening it. Just one line. "I didn't think you'd come back this fast." I didn't respond immediately. I read it again, then locked the phone and set it down. Because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a consequence. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The city outside looked exactly the same as it did that morning. Traffic moving, people walking, nothing stopped. Nothing changed. And that's the thing most people don't understand. Moments like this don't look dramatic from the outside. There's no explosion, no visible collapse, just quiet correction. But inside that correction, everything is different. Because once something like this happens, you don't go back to trusting the same way. You don't ignore the same signs. You don't assume the same intentions. You see clearly. And once you see clearly, you don't unsee it. I turned back toward the room and picked up my phone one last time. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. If your own sister did this to you, would you remove her completely from your life? Or would you give her a second chance? Comment A if you'd remove her. Comment B if you'd give her another chance. Because control isn't just about business. Sometimes, it's about who you allow to stay in your life after everything is over.